The third here is this whole business of the movement, which is simply crucial. And perhaps just to illustrate this in this kind of a fashion, in the God lecture, the movement that's always in the back of my mind is to start here out on the surface and trap them by dealing just here with the externals. To just add a little bit to this, which would fit, these comments would fit someplace else better, that I'm also out to astound them, and I'm out to astound them with a series of sharp images, and then also, as I said to some of you before, by using the King's English in a very rapid and highly stylized and in the rich sense of the word, with rhetorical beauty. But that's there on that God lecture that I try to do. But you start out here, really, with something that's happened in civilization. And then your next movement is to flop this over and catch their interior being within it. When people have said they don't know how our lectures hang together, I sometimes think that they are thinking too much externally. For our hanging together is in terms of the dramatic movement. Or to put it in words, if you don't misunderstand these, it's a psychological hanging together. And then, and I didn't do that well. I mean, did you just flop that over? And you flop it over rather gently at first, so they do not know what's coming off. And perhaps tonight or tomorrow I can illustrate what that means. You even have them laughing. This is the place where you tell that womb story. And you know, I don't tell it much anymore, and I will give you an illustration of situations which I think should tell it later on. I don't tell it anymore. But the power of that story is that it's just damn exciting, you know, and everybody, yeah, hell, yeah, yeah. And they'll laugh when they come to those Band-Aids and so on, but what they're doing, they're sawing off their own legs. When you get through here, they're down on their stumps. I mean, you've got them. And then when you get that, then you've got to drive it, and I mean drive it hard. But you got to know when you hook. You don't start driving until you know damn well you've got them down on their stumps. Then you drive, and you drive hard. And I don't mean meanly, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And finally, the climax is what I suggested before here, that you leave them with a decision on their hands. And there are different ways in which, of course, you do this. In this one, I've always preferred that suddenly you just quit. You just quit. That suddenly you just quit. There have been times with this lecture when you just finally see them out. And then they got this massive thing on their lap that they cannot avoid, one way or another, doing something about it. But anyway, you have to figure out your movement, and you know what your interior movement of that lecture is. Then I would want to put, and this can't be divorced from that, the overall mood.
Can I go back?
Yes, please.
What if you tell the womb story, and if that's what you're going to get them hooked, or get them on their stump, and you don't do it with that? Do you have two other things?
Oh, yes, I should say. And this is really what here. You don't give all four of these, but you have them. For instance, in the womb, in the area in which you're really dealing with the contingency of man, we have three classical series that we use, and one is the womb approach. I was going to do this tomorrow, but do it now. One is the womb approach. These are for the naive. This one is mostly for the naive. Now, by the way, you don't mean the naive, one who's a generally naive. He may be a mean as hell naive type, if you please. But this is the one that you use on him. Then we have another series, and it goes something like this. Back in the primordial moment when up through the murky swamps man emerged, and finally his head popped up into consciousness, and then began his quest after certainty, after unambiguity, after happiness. And then finally met. The bottom of certitude, which is uncertainty. The bottom of the unambiguous, which is ambiguity. And the bottom of happiness, which is perpetual anxiety. And you know this routine that gets at man's contingency. I would say that is for the one who knows, but damn well hadn't come to terms with his knowing. And then we've got a third sequence that begins with the world and history and the self. And this is the one in which you take your approach. In our time today, you only have to underscore the fact that one day this world was here, and one day it was not here. Two celestial bodies bumped, and two celestial bodies bumped. It's that routine. And that you only have to underscore the fact that history once wasn't here, and this great human drama one day won't be here. After all, everybody has seen the movie on the beach. And then you don't have to do any more than call people's attention to the fact that they showed up with nothing, and they shall one day show up with not nothing. And this is where you, your own, showed up in existence, in which you hit hard at the fate, element of fate, and the element of death. Now there are many other sequences here. You could very well use the Tillich one, and we used to use this in a different context. Fate and doom, fate and death, guilt and gloom, emptiness and meaninglessness. Now, you could take this kind of approach, but you've got to have strong illustrations for this. And we've tempted in our day to hit these two. Billy said, here's where you had to hit, you remember. But this has been highly effective too. This may be becoming more effective right through here.
Guilt and doom.
A few years ago, all you'd get is a bunch of moral drippings.
When would you use that, though?
Well, I would use it for one of these.
So, I mean, with what kind of group would you sense that would be needed?
Today, in these days, I would not use it. I think much. In the old times, we used to have a double take on the God lecture. Now, not the question of God, this one, but on the God lecture. One was to deal with this in terms of what I'd almost want to call the external categories, and one with the internal categories, or psychological categories and phenomenological categories. And the phenomenological categories came from Jaspers, although you found them in many other places, and the psychological came out of here. But anyway, my point is that you need these full, and you need to be able to draw on just so much more than you possess. What you possess, really, only what you've finally been able to put on your palette, to use roughly. Once you do that, then you're not at a loss.
Well, I guess my point was, you say that at this point in the lecture, I'm going to have them where I can start driving hard to communicate.
By the time I got through with one of these, I would want them in my hip pocket. If I didn't have them, well, fine, then you got to go on. Certainly. In this particular lecture, I would not stop and belabor this if I missed them here. I would intend, because the way I'm going to lay out the lecture, you go around the barn twice, and I would get them on that second round, or try to, if I missed on that first one. In some lectures, the way they're structured, that you just better stop until you get them.
Well, what do you do with someone who's so self-righteous about their own lifestyle? And I'm thinking in particular of a person that's like, very strong, maybe refer to the Bible Belter or something, and they can't see this world here or something. It's so difficult for them.
Well, yeah, I understand that. People from the Bible Belt, I do not find ever any problem. I find them really rather tremendous. Although you would find certain ones in there, but that's not a mass category, the way I experience. Those ones that are difficult like that, I never try to do anything with in the lecture. If you in your lecture try, if it's the first lecture particularly, if you try to work on a case like that, you'd be in trouble. I keep watching for in a seminar, and particularly if you've got them on the ropes in the seminar just a little bit, if you happen to see them crack just a little, then in a lecture, my Lord, you can turn in on them with a kind of objectivity. But you've got to know that first a crack took place before you work with that kind in a lecture, and it can't be on the first one.
Well, my brother graduated from Bob Jones University with his wife, so there's this background. And his only defense to anything that you come up with is, like, pull up the Bible and it'll say sort of emotionally to you, but not really emotionally, but I'll take my chances with this. And it's just a pure word-for-word interpretation of the Bible. This is the rule. This is the way it is. And anything that conflicts with the way they interpret the Bible, it just can't be. And there's just no breaking through this with anything.
Yeah, well, I think that you probably pointed to the most difficult type of a religious positivist you could think of. You see, well, Bob Jones is forward. You see, when you had what happened in the 19th century happen, you had two movements. One was fundamentalism, and the other one was the holiness movement. Do you understand this? Now, or the evangelical movement, if that's better, but at its intense, it was the holiness movement. And if you remember the triangle that tells about the different denominations, you can understand it. Sometimes these people are called fundamentalists. They aren't fundamentalists. A fundamentalist really comes out of the Reformed tradition. I tell you, when you get a Presbyterian fundamentalist, you damn well got a Presbyterian fundamentalist. And Bob Jones is the end of the road of Reformed fundamentalism. Oh, that thing is a vicious thing. And if my brother were there, I think I'd start praying. Seriously. Well, I mean that seriously. I mean that seriously. And then, of course, we can't hear it into detail. I'd watch every step I could to just take a little break, but you're not going to blast that. They have armor like an armadillo, is that what they have? Now, then, just a word here, and my time is getting by here, on the delivery. Oh, yes.
What type of person would use that third illustration, world history himself? Because you talked about using the womb story with the naive, say, the story of man's origins out of with the Lucifer. Man who has not come to terms with the Lucidity, and then world history himself.
I would use those for the people I spot as just extremely lucid. And by the way you finally hook this person, he's out here shaking his head, shaking his head. And he has fun with this part. He just shakes his head. And he doesn't know what you got in store when he come down, where you're asking him to deliver his life, to extend his death. Now, there are times, I think, probably, when you run into a naive group, where you could God question lecture just with this the one side. But not much these days, I sense.
I'm sorry, Joe. The one side means what?
That was a terrible term. The old movement. Or the non-being pole. Where there's no chance of working on the being pole, I suspect, until they've seen that non-being pole. That doesn't mean their spirit problem is at the non-being pole. It's at the being pole, I would want to say. Oh, yes, and I'm about to forget that again. Move. It seems to me a crucial part of the formation of this is you're deciding the kind of a general mood in which you're going to operate in. And that means as a whole. And maybe preface it this way. A few years ago, you had to operate in sort of a steel mood, a stern mood. Some people called it a mean mood. I'll come back to that in a moment. Today, I do not think that is the approach at all, but as a whole, it's got to be winsome. It's got to be a winsome. I don't mean you turn soft. No, I don't mean that. But that you turn on your winsomeness, and that you pull, and you pull. And if you think that this is treating people nice, then I'd like to say to you what you're doing is manipulating them, the same you were when you turned on the mean mood. If just to be sure you don't get this mixed up with some kind of now you're more loving. If that's what you think, then you don't even know what creating a mood really means at all. But you have to decide what that mood is going to be that you're going to turn on, and then you have to decide that in various parts within your lecture, which throws me into the part I want to go to now, and that's the delivery of the lecture, and has to do with goals. I'm not interested in too much in the preparation. Now, I think, first of all, that we've got to really develop skill in using our voice. And I don't mean in the old sense of elocution lessons or anything like that. You don't have to have a good voice. I probably have one of the worst voices anybody ever had. And part of it was misuse of my voice earlier, and still I misuse it. But you see, my voice isn't a handicap to me. I know that. It could have been a much better voice, but I can damn well use that voice to make it do what I want it to do. And this is the crucial thing. And fundamentally, I think this is what we have to have in mind. We don't try to improve our voice necessarily, although there is improvement of the voice, so certainly, but to begin to use it. And this to me is the most crucial, is to project it. This is a psychological matter primarily. As I think you know, you've got to be able to throw your voice there and here and back behind you if you want. You've just got to learn to do that. I one time heard Vance over in the chapel delivering a lecture all to himself. I think there was a mouse sitting out there. But this is tremendous. And I did not stay around. I was too embarrassed. So I left. But I would hope that he was pushing his voice out different places and learning to put it here, to put it there, to put it where you want to put it. But you always put it outside yourself. And this has nothing to do with noise. You project when they can't hear you. I might say that it's a good gimmick to learn how to talk in such a way that that guy in the back can't hear you. And it really comes off when he tells you to speak up. But this, I think, is crucial, and that you've got, especially you women, are going to have to learn how to control your voice. You have a far harder job, I think, than the men do. And then you have to learn how to use pitch. You have to learn how to speak loud, softly. You have to learn how to talk loud without screaming. You know it's ridiculous when you scream. You've heard me very frequently when I'm shoving way up here and loud, slip over into the screen, and everybody gets embarrassed, including me. That's tragic when that happens, and you must not do that. And I suppose a person like myself has a great danger of slipping over into the screen. And sometimes, you know, people say that you do that when you're running a little thin on your soap. Well, sometimes I'm sure that's true, but that's not always true. You just make a mistake of your voice, but what it communicates is that you're out of soap. There's no doubt about that. I suppose that's why we're humiliated. Then I think that we have to learn to pace. And I feel that reading your poetry is just simply crucial. I should think that if you're going to be a teacher, that that you have got to be going, I don't know where. I was going to say it's hard to find a place around here where there aren't other people anymore, where you can make an ass out of yourself. Yeah, but to get off and read poetry, read poetry, read poetry, read poetry, read poetry. This will and make that poem do a million things for you. Not I, but the wind that blows through. And by poetry, uses words as words ought to be used, so that each one is a universe of images and feelings and emotions. Prose doesn't use a word like that. Now, you can't help but use it that way in prose, but poetry is geared to use it until you begin to get the feel. Yeah, that was a good illustration. The feel after a word. The feel after it. And then you've got to learn to make those words dance rapidly, like a fast-running stream, and then you've got to learn how to make those words just tiptoe along. And I do not think that you can overemphasize this because of the kind of teaching we do. This comes back to the dramaturgical aspect of it. We'd like to go on. Oh, and the scriptures. And remember, when you're reading the scriptures, you're always reading poetry. You're not reading prose. Always. And when you finally see that, then, my Lord, you can make that dance in such a way that it just flips the beat of anyone who listens to it. And then, I've already mentioned this, you've got to learn to get ranges, and you can only do that, it seems to me, by practice. The second thing, in terms of delivery, is what I would call passion. Passion, passion, passion. And I think that there are a lot of us who are good teachers here who have not learned how to put passion into what they're saying. And that doesn't mean, you know, that you're noisy about it. Probably the ones that I can't help but being noisy at my age, after being noisy all these years. Victim of my past. And I wouldn't want to be otherwise. It's a part of my power. But there are those who speak like mice, who have passion, deep passion, deep passion. I think this comes, first of all, by understanding what you're saying. If you have the principle that you're never going to say any more than you believe or any less than you believe, and I don't mean believe up here, I mean believe with your guts in any situation, your passion will come. But when you are mouthing something that you have not understood intellectually and that you have not grounded in your own life, then you'll not have passion. And without that, you cannot create it. You cannot simulate it. Passion comes out of this kind of a bottom. This hasn't anything to do with, you know, how fine you are or how much of the time that you are really the living picture of Jesus Christ. It has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, the figure occurred to me back on your earlier point when you said that relative to mood, that we're not mean anymore. I think on this business of passion, the picture I always have is the captain of the ship who walks into the dining room and everyone has on evening dresses, and you announce that the ship is sinking and that you want everyone to go out and get on a lifeboat. And the passion, I mean, you know, you don't have to be mean to say that you're going to shoot the first person that panics. I mean, you're just, I mean, you want to communicate that there's an objective situation here, and the passion is there because you understand it's a serious situation. And the captain, no matter what kind of scoundrel he is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just tremendous. I just have not seen that like that before. not only do you understand intellectually, and with your, oh, by the way, and that intellectual understanding, that does not mean that you're clear on everything. To understand means that you understand this, and that you do not understand this, and that you partly understand this, and then you operate accordingly. And I think this is just crucial, that you see that if you and I waited until we intellectually understood everything that we're talking about in this, we would never get around to being a teacher. But it's crucial that you know where you do not understand. And there's where you keep your intellectual integrity as you move forward. Then I think the third thing where passion comes is when you love people. I mean love the people that you teach. Now nobody from the outside can finally judge. I have learned, and I mean this intellectually, I've learned intellectually to pay no attention to people who are keeping my conscience for me, who are telling me when I'm loving somebody and loving, I alone have to decide that. This is what Bonhoeffer means when he said, you have to decide your motives. Nobody else can decide them for you, and you never know what they are. You have to decide. Now, this doesn't mean you don't pay any attention when your wife or somebody says you misuse somebody. You damn well do pay attention. But your wife or no one else decides whether or not you love someone or that you love the people that you teach. But inside yourself, this ought to drive you to prayer, that you love those people that you teach. And that when you are mean here in such a way that some damn sentimentalist says you're misusing someone, you just damn well better decide whether you're loving that person or not. And I've seen some teaching here that I did not feel was out of love. Now finally that person has to decide that. But I think this is crucial. And real passion never comes until you love. I know you love until you honor the people that you're teaching. And it has nothing to do with letting them express their opinions. It's nothing to do with giving them a chance to talk or discuss or to share. It has nothing whatsoever to do with that. It has to do with the very deeps of your being that are privy only to you and the Lord together. Passion cannot come out of any other relationship than honor and love for those that we teach. And I think lastly, that passion only comes out of your being a dead man. Somebody put it earlier here. As long as being a teacher is something you have to be, or some way or other is great, or is more important for the mission than changing the many school diapers, then you're not going to have passion. You may have force, but you're not going to have passion. Only when you're a dead man. Only when there is a mission that is more important than you are. One of the most frightening things when the council was here is when one of the men led a conversation, and really his question, what would you be willing, literally, to take a 45 and blow out your brains for? I tell you, that was a sobering question. And of course, there's the element of the game in it, because beforehand you don't finally decide such a thing. But it's a very serious game, a very helpful game. If you're going to be a teacher, you've got to be a dead man. You've got to have some understanding of that for which you have become now no longer important. And this, of course, has to fit in with every individual. Or a man who has not died his death cannot finally risk himself. And teaching is risking himself. That low voice you have not yet. You don't take a risk yourself. Teaching is risking yourself. And in a million and one subtle ways. And if you aren't a dead man, you're not going to risk yourself. And you can tell, at least I think you can tell, relatively speaking, when a teacher moves in on a person with genuine fear and trembling in terms of risking himself and when he's moving in to defend himself. One sort of stinks. And there's something, even though it gives you pain to see any teacher move in on anybody, if you have any sensitivities at all, it kills you. And if you're the second teacher and don't want to come to that person's rescue, then you're not a good second teacher. But if you're a good second teacher, you damn well don't come to his rescue. You sit there in your pain and endure it. But only the dead man. Oh, look, my time is up. Then I will very quickly here move. The third thing, what was I on there? Passion. The third thing is the role. That is, you genuinely have to decide to be an actor. And an actor is a person that utterly loses himself in the part he's portraying and at the same time is utterly detached from that part. Now you find some actors that are detached and can never become the role, and you find others who can only be that role. The fine actor is the man who's lost himself to that part, while at the same time he's standing over there watching what the audience is doing. Do you understand that? And this is integrity in dramaturgy. And nothing else is integrity. This man knows exactly what he's doing all along. This is why he can play out here, and if someone bites his finger off, he just put it behind his back and go on playing. Because he's never lost himself in that role. And yet, I mean, he's that role. And I think that's simply crucial. You see this, of course, coming out when you have misguided gestures, like, ouch! Little things give you away on the use of your body. Well, I could go on there, but I'll stop. You have to be the master of the audience. And here, I mean, your brooding is crucial as you begin to go to that door. And if you're like I am, when it comes time for you to lecture, you are literally tempted to go away where nobody can find you, or to shoot yourself, or to fall down a flight of stairs, or anything, as you begin to move. But when you hit that door, you have to decide to give that lecture. Even at times I felt beforehand, it's sort of like a premonition, that I was just going to flop all over that place. For sometimes there are reasons I could only barely feel after it. And knew damn well I ought not be giving it, but when the time comes, then you decide that you're going to give that lecture, and you move and you give that lecture. And if you don't decide, then you haven't the slightest chance to be the master of that audience. And the picture I have is a man who knows how to play an organ. I mean to play an organ. And he rules that audience as long as he is giving his lecture. But fundamentally, he has to decide to come in and rule. I'd like to talk about more as to the little kind of gimmicks that you pull at the beginning and that you pull at the end to be sure that you were the master of that situation as long as you were giving the lecture. But we can leave that until later, and my time's up, and we'll do the formal structure of that lecture tomorrow.